Afternoon. Congresswoman, thank you very much for joining us. How are you today?
Thank you for having me on. I'm doing well.
Let's talk about the moment you found out as the announcement was being read at about this time yesterday that there would be no charges for the 8 officers in this incident. What was your initial reaction?
My initial reaction was disappointment. I was unfortunately not surprised, however, to learn that the grand jury decided to not indict any of the officers. We've seen time and time again across the country that when officers have found themselves in a situation where they are killing young Black men, especially, the justice system protects their duties as police officers, and they have pretty wide-ranging ability to carry out their duties, which oftentimes leaves communities heartbroken and picking up the pieces and still trying to figure out why and what's next.
That's a pretty big allegation. This was a grand jury made up of 9 peers that live. They are voters within Summit County. What is the basis for saying that the justice system protected their own?
Well, there are laws like, or court cases like qualified immunity that give a lot of latitude for police officers to engage in activities that many of us might look at and think are excessive or dangerous. And we have talked about what legislation looks like at the state level, at the federal level, at the local level, and we have come to realize that the law sometimes does not allow for people to feel that the decision is just, and that would mean changing the law. There's not a lot that you can do outside of the law. As someone who is trained in it, I am very respectful of it, but also understand that the decisions that come from it don't always leave you feeling hopeful or optimistic or that justice has been served. And so when that happens, we have to think about what our other options are. The city of Akron put together a citizen petition to create a citizen review board. That is an option. There's an option to have the Department of Justice investigate the police department, or the Department of Justice could bring their own charges against the law enforcement officers. There are other legal options and opportunities for people who feel victimized to access justice, and that's something that every citizen should have, and certainly will be looked into here in the 13th Congressional District as it relates to the death of Jayland Walker.
And that's a pledge you made in front of the family yesterday. You are, and I'd like to ask you today, have you formally requested yet? Is this an application process? You have said that you are going to ask the Department of Justice to come in and at least investigate the department itself and their practices. Have you made that formal request yet, and how does that work?
We have not made that formal request yet. It will be forthcoming soon. But the process is simply us writing a formal letter and saying we would like the Department of Justice, the Civil Rights Division, to take a look at, for example, the patterns and practices of the Akron Police Department. We heard the police chief yesterday say that they were going to do an internal investigation of those patterns or their hiring practices, their training, their protocols, their chase protocols. But my suggestion would be to have an outside independent investigator come in and look at what happened in Akron and determine whether or not they are doing the right things. It is a way that we can continue to promote the public safety while also having accountability. Both of those things can and should exist at the same time. They're not mutually exclusive. And I would contend, in order for us to continue to mend and heal, to create trust between the community and our law enforcement, having an independent outside investigator to look at these issues, these patterns, these practices, and help us determine whether or not they are fair to our community members and keep our law enforcement officers safe as well.
And of course, Clevelanders know that all too well. Similar process, Department of Justice coming in, looking at the Cleveland Police Department shortly after the Tamir Rice shooting, determining that the practices, many practices within Cleveland Police were not up to date, not up to standards. That's what brought about the consent decree. Representative Sykes, I'd like to ask you, how much, we saw more than 260 files released by the Ohio Attorney General yesterday. Our staff, myself included, we have gone through many of those. How much should the public be taking into account what was going on in Jayland Walker's life the month before the shooting? Thought it was interesting. At the funeral, we never heard any talk about a fiance. At any press conference held by the family attorneys after the shooting, never any talk about a fiance who had died on May 28th. Just about a month before Jayland Walker went on this chase, fired a shot, and we know what happened after that. There are a number of documents within the report from the Attorney General showing that Jayland Walker in the month leading up was Googling things like quickest way to die, drinking bleach, how much bleach to drink. Why have we not heard anything about that? And how much of that does the public need to take into account leading up to what happened on June 27th?
I think the important thing to remember here is Jayland Walker is not and was not under criminal investigation. People are certainly free to look at all of the evidence that the Attorney General collected, all of the interviews that he conducted over the process of this investigation. But Jayland Walker was not and is not on trial here. His mental state and his family, I do believe that they did speak about his fiance and did talk about that being a devastating loss for him, and it would be a devastating loss for a lot of people. But we have to remember who is not with us to tell their side of the story and how that came about. And I think we should be much more respectful to his life and his memory, as well as his family, and not try to put him on trial as he is not the one who has been brought before the grand jury under investigation.
It's a very good point. A lot of grief for the family. There is an utmost respect for what they are going through. But if the public is standing back trying to decide for themselves, was this justified? Was this not justified? Should these officers face charges? You do have to look at all of the evidence. And while the Attorney General stopped short of saying this was suicide by cop, they did indicate that for that month leading up to it, that Jayland Walker surely had not been himself. What is your take on the evidence? Have you been able to go through any or all of it to look at what was going on in his life leading up to it?
I have not been able to go through all of the evidence, and I will spend the time looking through it, as I'm sure many others will. But again, I would just remind you that the narrative of criminalizing Jayland Walker is not appropriate. He is not under investigation. His actions were not before the grand jury. He was not a law enforcement officer sworn to protect and serve the community. And out of respect for his family, I do hope that people are much more considerate of the fact that he lost his life, that his family is grieving, that a community is grieving, and not put him on trial. And that a community is grieving and not put him on trial.
And then, of course, that his fiancé family is still going through everything they are. We are speaking with Congresswoman Amelia Strong Sykes. She represents Akron and the surrounding area for the District 13 in Congress in Washington. Congresswoman, we like to give the final word to our guests here on our digital platforms. You get the final word. You've called for a Department of Justice investigation of the Akron Police Department. We are less than or just at 24 hours after finding out that 8 police officers will, in fact, not stand trial, at least at the state level, for what they've done. What would you like to leave our viewers with today?
Well, one, I want them to know that as their member of Congress, I am committed to ensuring that we move forward and we move forward together. As I said before, public safety and accountability go hand in hand. They are not mutually exclusive, and it is important that our law enforcement officers feel they are part of the community embraces them as a part of the family, the community family, and we find ways to work with one another. We have to find ways to work with one another in order for our communities to be vibrant places where we can live, where we can thrive, where we want to start our families and grow our families and businesses and so on. So I'm committed to this work. It is important work to me. It should be important work to everyone. And the public safety is top top of my mind. I hope it is for everyone else.
And Congresswoman, we certainly appreciate the time. We know you were in Akron yesterday. You're back in Washington, D.C., so we know your time is very valuable. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Have a great day.
All right, we're going to wrap up our conversation here. We do have our news coming up at about 5 o'clock. We're a little bit delayed today. We had soccer on, so we will have all of the day's events. It has been a very busy day down in Akron. A show of support for the family, a march, a rally, a vigil going on later this evening at about 6 o'clock. And we are committed to continuing coverage in the case of Jayland Walker. Until the 5 o'clock news, I'm Dana Rose with 19 News Now. Have a great afternoon.
19 News is everywhere. Download our CTV apps and follow us on social media at Cleveland 19 News.
Is what kept him going. It seems like we're having some issues with bringing you that sound from Martin Collins. However, Marciah Collins, his son, was a football player and was also on the track team. His father says he was at every game, and if he couldn't be there in person, he watched the games on his phone. New this afternoon, technology issues grounded Southwest airline flights earlier today. According to flight tracking website FlightAware, nearly 2,500 flights were delayed. Flights resumed a short time later with residual delays in some places. This is just the latest issue to plague the airline. During the holiday season, thousands of flights were canceled during a winter weather storm.
Oklahoma's governor is calling on 4 officials, including a sheriff, to resign after they were allegedly caught in a recording, an audio recording, threatening to kill reporters and mourning the end of the practice of lynching black people. This is all playing out in McCurtain County, which sits on the border of Arkansas. That audio, published by the McCurtain Gazette newspaper, says it was recorded following a Board of Commissioners meeting in early March. KXII's Caroline Cluis Fletcher has the audio and the fallout.
I know where 2 big deep holes are here in Navy. I got an excavator. These are pre-dug.
The Gazette reporter who recorded this conversation identifies these speakers as the sheriff, Kevin Clardy, and Commissioner Mark Jennings. Jennings continues apparently lamenting the discontinuation of lynching.
Take a damn blanket and whoop their ass and throw them in the cell. I'd run for sheriff. Yeah. Well, it's not like that. I know. We're taking that on Mud Creek and hung them up with the damn rope. Yeah. But you can't do that. They got more rights than we got.
In a press release sent out Sunday night, Governor Stitt calls that language hateful rhetoric, saying there's no place for it in Oklahoma.
We're better people than this, and we've got to respond better. And especially you as public officials have got to respond better. Thank you.
Yeah. What if they do not resign? Well, that's left now it's in the hand of the governor of the state of Oklahoma.
I took a look at state statutes today. If county officials don't resign, they aren't subject to impeachment, but they can be removed from office for several reasons, including oppression, corruption, and maladministration. Rumors circulating online claim the sheriff resigned